Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be reading you a story called The Butcher of Saint Eustache. Monday, January 6th, 1992, was a typically crisp winter's day in Saint Calixte, Quebec. Rolande Oslin Boucage, a 47-year-old housewife from the village, had been out walking her dog, something she did every day, in all weathers. Now, as she approached her home, Rolande noticed a balding man standing on her walk, a trusting sort. Rolande thought nothing of it. When the man asked her for directions, she gladly gave them. When he asked for a glass of water, she agreed to go inside and fetch one for him. When Rolande returned with the water, she found the stranger waiting on her front porch. As she handed the glass to him, his friendly smile morphed suddenly into a primal snarl. He pushed her back inside and followed, drawing a gun from his pocket at the same time. A short while later, a shot rang out, snuffing out Rolande's life. Considering what was to come, it was probably a mercy. When Rolande's husband got home that night, he found her lying face down in a pool of blood. It was immediately clear that she was dead, and despite his shock and distress, the man had the presence of mind to not disturb anything and to call the police immediately. They arrived a short while later to a scene of utter carnage, a murder worse than most of them had ever seen before. Rolande Oslin Boucage had been killed quickly by a bullet wound to the head. Therefore, the killer had got to work. Fetching a knife from the kitchen, he had carved open the unfortunate woman's chest, exposing her internal organs. Then he began mutilating her breasts and genitals, hacking off chunks of flesh, some of which he stuffed into the victim's mouth. It was brutal crime, one that left investigators in little doubt. Unless the killer was caught, someone else was going to die. 11 months later, police officers were called to a residence in the small town of Deux Montagnes, where the severely mutilated body of Chantal Brier had been found. Brier, mother of a 6-year-old son, had been in the process of selling her house, as she and her husband were moving to Montreal. On the day of the murder, Chantal had kissed her husband goodbye as she left for work. Then she'd driven the short distance to her mother's house to drop off her son Jonathan. She didn't want him getting in the way. She had someone coming to view the house. When Chantal returned, the prospective buyer was already there. The man seemed slightly irritable, saying that he'd meant to bring his camera along to take some pictures of the house, but had forgotten it. He then departed, only to return about an hour later, camera in hand. While the man was viewing the property and taking snapshots, the phone rang. It was Chantal's husband, Raymond. Chantal then handed the phone to the stranger, and he and Raymond spoke for a few minutes about the property. After they hung up, Chantal's mother phoned, but Chantal asked her to call back in a half hour, as she was still showing the house. When Chantal's mother made the arranged call about 30 minutes later, there was no reply. Assuming that Chantal was still busy, she waited a while and then tried again. Still nothing. When several more calls during the afternoon went unanswered, the older woman phones her other daughter, Francine, and asked her to accompany her to Chantal's house. They arrived to find the place in darkness. Entering the residence, the two women called out Chantal's name and got no reply. Then as Francine ventured further inside, she saw her sister lying face down on the floor. Chantal was naked from the waist down, her hands were bound behind her back, and a length of electrical cord was pulled tightly around her throat. There was blood everywhere, so much of it that Francine was immediately sure that her sister was dead. No one could lose that much blood and still be alive. Francine shielded her mother from the scene and ushered her outside. Then she called the police. Investigators were certain that the man who had murdered Chantal Brier was the same man who had killed Rolande Oslin Boucage. That meant they were dealing with a serial killer, one who was adept with a knife and also savvy enough not to leave evidence at the scene. They knew also that such killers often take trophies from their victims. An inventory of Chantal's possessions was therefore carried out to see if anything was missing. Chantal's husband pointed out right away that her bank card was gone. A check with the bank revealed that the card had been used at 1 p.m. on the day of the murder, and a scan of the ATM's surveillance video gave police the first glimpse of their suspect, a stocky, slightly balding man. The police noticed something else on the tape, something that worried them greatly. While the man was waiting in the queue to use the cash machine, he struck up a conversation with a middle-aged woman. The conversation appeared friendly enough, and the two were later spotted walking away together. Investigators were concerned that the woman on the tape may have been the killer's next victim. After tracking down her name and details through bank records, they went to her house, fearful of what they might find. Fortunately, the woman was alive and well. Yes, she said she did remember using the ATM, and of course she remembered talking to the balding man. He was her husband, Serge Archambault. Archambault was immediately placed under arrest. Under interrogation, the 36-year-old former butcher turned traveling salesman admitted to killing Chantal Breyer and Rolande Oslin Bucage. Then he surprised the detectives by giving up the name of another victim. She was Anne Cordina Leva, a former lover who had reacted badly when he'd ended their relationship. Cordina Leva had threatened to speak to Archambault's wife, so he'd silenced her forever by cutting her throat. He'd then dismembered her body and disposed of the remains in various landfills. Serge Archambault, dubbed the Butcher of Saint Eustache by the media, went on trial in November 1993. As he had already confessed, the jury had to decide if the murders were committed in the first or second degree. Archambault's defense team contended that he had killed on the spur of a moment and was thus guilty of second-degree murder. The evidence, however, said different. The elaborate ruse to get access to Chantal Breyer's home spoke of pre-planning. So did a murder kit found in Archambault's car. It contained gun, knives, and several ligatures. In the end, the jury came down in favor of the prosecution. Serge Archambault was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.